Okay, it's William Wagner. We're here again on March 29th with Irwin Schiff in Las Vegas at his store where he says, pay no income taxes. Thank you, Irwin, for doing this interview with me.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
It's good to have you on my show again. Again. Now, this is March of '04, and the last time I interviewed you was June 4th, I think, of '03. At that time, your sign was covered up. You were under Judge Lloyd's...
Lloyd George.
Lloyd George, the federal judge.
Yeah, issued a restraining order that I couldn't sell my book. But more important what he did, not more important, but even more egregious, is that in the restraining order, he said I could not say that the paying of income tax is voluntary. I couldn't say it. I couldn't go on the radio and say it's voluntary, even though it is. The restraining order, the preliminary injunction rather, which is still on my website, he also said I couldn't say that the word income means a corporate profit, which is what it does.
That's what the tax code says, isn't
well,
it?
the code itself, well, but see, the code itself doesn't define income because it can't. The Supreme Court actually defined the word income to mean a corporate profit. But when the new code came out in 1954, the House and Senate, in what I would call a secret report, said that the word income, as used in the Internal Revenue Code, was used in its constitutional sense. Income is used in its constitutional sense. It does not mean income in the ordinary sense. Now, income in the constitutional sense means a corporate profit. Now, if you go to my website now, you will see those House and Senate reports posted on my website. Also, within the next 2 or 3 days, I will post to my website at least 4 motions in supporting a memorandum explaining why because you know they filed about 50 charges against me for tax evasion and...
No, you're jumping into a story. I was back in June of last year,
okay,
and you were under a quote-unquote temporary restraining order, which lasted for what, 2
or 3 months? But then they got a
4 months?
Then they got a preliminary injunction.
Then they got a preliminary injunction.
Well, let me explain about the preliminary injunction. This is funny. At the hearing for the preliminary injunction, I had 3 witnesses who took the stand. I had 8, but the judge wouldn't let me put on more than 3. Now, all of my witnesses testified. I said to them, did my book cause you to stop paying income taxes? And they all said no. They said, your book merely caused me to examine the law, to do further research. And they said, based upon their additional research, they all said they bought Internal Revenue codes from me. That based upon their additional research, they concluded that there was no law that required them to file, there was no law that required them to pay income taxes, there was no law that made them liable for income tax, and they all testified. We also determined we had no income in the constitutional sense. Now, I asked these witnesses, and you can hear that, we have tapes of this.
Right.
I said, if on cross-examination the U.S. attorney were to show you a law making you liable for income tax, would you start paying income tax again? They said yes. So, when I turned them over for cross-examination, it was incumbent upon the U.S. attorney to say, well, here's the law. He didn't. So, the U.S. attorney did not even cross-examine my witnesses. I insisted upon going under oath, and I challenged the U.S. attorney to show me anything in my book or in any of the supplemental material that I published, any law, anything in my books in which I encourage people to commit tax evasion or break the law. And he said to the judge, he doesn't have to provide me with any such information at this time. And the government put on no witnesses of its own. So picture this. Judge Lloyd George awards the decision to the government. The government puts on no witnesses that I can cross-examine. They don't cross-examine my own witnesses who said that my books did not cause them, and they didn't cross-examine me. As a matter of fact,
and still the judge gave him the restraining order.
Right. Now, in the restraining order, not only was it directed at my books, but in the preliminary injunction, which followed the restraining order, I was told that I could not say that the income means a corporate profit, which is exactly what it means.
According to the Supreme Court.
According to the Supreme Court and the House and Senate, who issued a report. It was a House and Senate report in 1954, in which the reports, as I say, are posted to my website. Now, I was working on my new book, and my new book was going to be entitled, let me see, am I leaving?
Stay in the center.
Okay. My new book was going to be entitled The Repeal of the Income Tax. The income tax was actually repealed in 1954. It was not officially repealed, but it was repealed in fact. Because in 1954, the government changed the meaning of income. And they said that income is used in its constitutional sense. And in its constitutional sense, income means a corporate profit. Well, I can prove that very quickly, so you'll understand. I mean, it's not even hard. You may or may not know this, but corporations can have billions of dollars worth of income. For instance, Enron, in the last 4 years of its life, paid no income tax. But Enron had all kinds of income. As a matter of fact, they bought that stadium, they bought that sports stadium.
Enron Corporation paid no
income tax.
Corporate income tax since the last 4 years
of its life.
Of its existence.
Well, as a matter of fact...
And they bought a stadium.
Yeah. At least 5% of the Fortune 500 companies pay no income tax. Now, many corporations pay no income tax. You know why? They have no profit. Sometimes corporations have billions, but then they have carry forward losses or they write off whole plans. A corporation doesn't pay an income tax on its commissions, on its rent, on its dividends. It only pays it on its profit. Now, if it has no profit, it pays no income tax.
Gotcha.
Now, the law itself, Section 61 of the Code, doesn't make a distinction between corporations or individuals. It doesn't mention them. So whatever applies to corporations with respect to income applies to individuals. Now, so corporations, you understand, pay no income tax on their income.
Right. I understand that.
They only pay income tax on their profit.
On their profits.
Now, the same principle applies to me. I don't have to pay income tax on my income. I only have to pay income tax on my profit. But individuals don't have a profit. In order to generate a profit, you're allowed to, say, businesses depreciate the income-producing assets. Now, what's my chief income-producing assets? Me, but I can't depreciate myself. Besides which, before a corporation has a profit, it takes its checkbook and it deducts from its revenue every check it writes. It deducts its automobile expenses, its insurance expenses, every item in the checkbook. Now, individuals can't deduct every item in the checkbook. They can't deduct their food, their medical bills, their transportation. So you can't have a profit. Let me explain this principle that I saw years and years ago, and one of the things that helped me question the income tax. Years ago, I had a sister who was, she lived right outside New York City. She lived in Westchester County. No children, she was married, and she and Jerry worked in Manhattan. And of course, there were two of them working, so the two of them paid the rent.
Right.
And they split, and the food bill. Then Jerry passed away. Now my sister had to pay the rent with her own salary. And sometimes when you cook for one, it's just as expensive as cooking for two. She had to take she commuted into Manhattan. If it rained, she had to take a cab to work. Since she worked in the garment center in New York, you had to go dressed, very well. So she had to go to the beauty parlor. And like a lot of women, they buy clothing just for work. And I remember I was paying taxes myself at the time, and I remember her commenting on the fact that every month she had to go to the savings account and take money out of the bank. That she wasn't earning enough money just to pay her expenses, because she had the rent to pay, commutation to pay, clothing to pay, beauty parlor here, and she was paying income taxes. And it dawned on me, I said, here, my sister Frances is not even making enough to pay her expenses, and she's paying income taxes? And she's paying taxes so the government can take their money and give it to farmers not to grow food, or taking her taxes and subsidizing, giving her money to the World Bank, which they can loan out to Brazil to build factories. Why should my sister, who's just about can't even make ends meet, have to pay taxes for those purposes? So that was just in the back of my head. Now, obviously, she wasn't making a profit.
No.
She was losing money every month.
Right.
You see. So what the government does is they tax the sources of income, not income itself. Now, this is all explained in a book I wrote called the Great Income Tax Hoax. So, incidentally, there are a lot of Americans who just work to make money so they can go to work tomorrow. But remember, even slaves on an old plantation, the slave owner gave them housing, gave them medical care, gave them food, gave them shelter, gave them all these things that they needed. Well, if you can just buy from your own wages, if you just pay the rent, then you're no different than a slave on the old plantation.
I hear you. So that explains why you got into this. You eventually appealed Judge Lloyd George
to the Ninth Circuit.
Ninth Circuit Appeals Court, right?
Appeals Court, yes.
3 judges.
Yes.
And when you appealed, they retook the restraining order off.
It's called giving it a stay.
They stayed. So you could sell your book.
So I can sell my books now.
You can sell the Federal Mafia, which you couldn't.
Then.
When I interviewed you last June.
I think we had little stripes on his. We had
banned.
Banned.
It's in the paper, banned.
When I couldn't sell a book, it sold for as much as $300 on eBay.
I saw that.
A lot of books went. Now they can buy the book for $45. If we have a new edition, for $45, that includes shipping and handling. That includes UPS.
Right.
I think it's a good book. Now, if you want to let me just show you something about this book. This is the book called The Federal Mafia, because organized crime in America begins with.
I agree with you.
I want to just show you something. Look, this is the index.
Right.
These are just the court decisions.
Court decisions.
There's about 100 court decisions.
Court cases cited.
Yeah, in the book. 100 court decisions. This is a book they're banning.
Right.
A book that cites 100 court cases. But not only that, but look, right
They're
here.
They're banning a book that cites 100 court cases.
So you see this? These are all of the. You see, I sell the Internal Revenue Code.
Right.
Now, these are individual code sections that I discussed. So there must be at least 75. So here is the government banning a book. There's no pornography in here.
No, no pornography.
We don't tell people how to make a bomb or anything. This is the first time the government ever bought a book that was critical of the government itself. That is the highest form of literary writing. That is what the First Amendment is designed to protect. Books that are critical of the government.
And it didn't protect you for about 3 months, did it? For about 3 months you weren't protected.
The Ninth Circuit ever affirms the injunction. I mean, the First Amendment would be dead in the United States. Let me explain what is.
How long have we been waiting now? How long have we been waiting for them to make a decision?
Since the oral argument is about 6 weeks.
It's been 6 weeks since you
oral
arguments, and you've already submitted the written documentation.
Oh yeah, before the oral argument. But let me explain to you what's at issue here. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Now that means abridge. Now, when the government says they can't sell this book, now why do they say they can't sell the book? They said because this book promotes tax evasion and lawlessness, which is nonsense. But even if it did, there's nothing in the First Amendment that says I could tell you, I could write a book saying, for instance, if people forfeit too, it's okay if they rob banks, because here's why. So I can write a book saying you can rob a bank. Well, if you rob the bank, then you're going to be arrested. But I can write a book. The only thing that you can do, actually, is write or use your speech or writing to encourage immediate violation of law. For instance, I can't get up and say why we ought to go to the jail and pull this guy out and lynch him. That will incite immediate lawlessness. But no one's going to read the book. No one's going to start to read this and go out and break the law. You got to. Has to do with taxes. The point is, here we have censorship. In Nazi Germany, they burned books. Here, they want me. Now, the government doesn't say that the book is banned. I can't sell it, but the book is available in libraries. people they didn't take them out of the library.
They didn't take them out of the library.
No,
so the federal mafia is available in library, but you weren't allowed to sell it.
Well, people were selling them on eBay.
I know, I saw that, $321 for an edition that you sell it for $40.
Yeah. You see, there are a lot of people who had copies of my book. They had 4 or 5 copies. They had a case of books. And so people were selling my book even though I couldn't. The whole thing is nonsense. Now, but you got to think of something here. The Lloyd George said my book was nonsense, as he said at the hearing. Now, would the government ban a book that was nonsense? Why? If it were nonsense, anybody could read it and spot it was nonsense. No,
of course.
They banned a book because it was persuasive. It wasn't nonsense. It explained why you didn't have to pay income taxes and how you could file a zero return, which I've been filing myself for the last 14 years. Well, think about it. Why did the government want to ban a book? Because the government didn't want the public to know how they can legally stop paying income taxes. This shows you the hypocrisy of our government. You see what it says right here? This book will convince you that organized crime in America begins with the federal government. Now, why did I get into this? Because I have a book over here called The Biggest Con, How the Government is Fleecing You. Have you ever read that book?
No, I haven't read. I got this book from you, but I haven't read it yet. I read the first.
Look at the reviews on the back page of the book. That was the book.
A blockbuster, brilliant, hilarious. John Chamberlain, author of Syndicated Columnist. And Alan C. Brownfield writes an important, well-researched, compendium, logical, and virtually irrefutable. That's pretty high praise. That's pretty high praise.
Yeah, and it was reviewed in the editorial section of the Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal says his analysis is hard to refute.
Now,
this book.
Now, let me show you something. Let me just read you the last lines that I wrote in this book. Now, this was the last lines in the book. Now, if it doesn't look like I'm reading the last lines, after I wrote the book, which was in hardcover, I came and the publisher wanted me to write a book on investments. So I did, largely showing how to invest in gold. And then I wrote another chapter for the soft cover. But this was actually the last 4 lines in my book. And let me read what it says. I said, the American productive giant can achieve miracles, but only if freed of the shackles of government regulations. I said, Americans today find themselves before an awesome crossroad. One road leads to the promised land. The other leads to economic and social tragedy of gigantic proportion. The choice is still ours. What my book said is that the government was undermining and destroying America's economic base, and that ultimately our economy is going to collapse if we don't reduce the size and power of the federal government. And I wrote that 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, we had a choice. Sorry to say, I think, we have no choice today. America is heading for third world status. We are going to be worse than a third world country. In the 30 years since I wrote this book, our whole industrial base has practically vanished. All our railroads have disappeared, have gone. Our shipping lines, all the steel factories are gone from Pittsburgh. We used to have 200...
Well, the railroad lines haven't disappeared. They're just having to subsidize them $2 billion a year.
But they're still... When they had... But they're gone. All the Pennsylvania Railroad, the New York, New Haven, Hartford, the Erie, the railroads are gone. The tracks, a lot of tracks have been ripped up. But the fact of the matter is, when the government took over passenger transportation, what was it? What did they call it? Anyway, Amtrak. They said Amtrak. That was like 30 years ago.
It's going to make money.
Yeah, 3 years. They said Amtrak will be self-sufficient in 3 years. It's still here. It's 25 years later, and they still need $1 billion subsidy. The fact of the matter is, but not only are the railroads losing money, but so are the airlines who need a subsidy. The point is, we have no shipping lines today to speak of. But 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we had 200 shoe factories in Brockton and Lynn, Mass. You can't even buy a picture frame made in the United States. You can't buy a clock made in the United States. You can't buy a camera made in the United States. You can't buy a washing machine. The only thing we have left, and we have a $500 billion trade deficit, which 30 years ago, 20 years ago, nobody would have believed that we could actually have a $500 billion deficit.
Seemed impossible.
But you know what's going to happen? Americans are very proud or secure in this great military establishment. We're not going to have that for very long either. Our military establishment is really going to collapse. And I'll tell you why. It's very simple. You can't be a military power unless you're an industrial power. You can't support a military. Now, you can't support a military with the productivity of lawyers and accountants and PR and mortgage brokers and retail clerks. You need steel factories. You need factories that make uniforms and then tanks and guns. We don't have the factories anymore.
We don't have much freight trains anymore. It
Well,
used to be, if you think back about 45, 50 years ago, a lot of goods traveled by rail. Today,
they travel by truck.
they travel by truck, and if diesel prices go up the way gasoline prices go, it could cripple us, and we have no alternative.
Exactly right, exactly right. When I was in the Army in 1950, I was in the travel section, and people would be discharged from Frankfurt, Germany, where I was stationed. And let's say they would have to go back, they would have to go to Storm Lake, Iowa, which came up. So my job was to figure out when the transport plane, the transport ship that they were on, was going to land in New York. And then I had train schedules. There was a book that had all the train schedules from around the country. The book must have been this thick. And I would look at the train schedules, and let's say I'd bring them to Chicago, and I know what time the train arrives in Chicago. I knew I'd have to catch, and I would bring them all the way to Storm Lake, Iowa. I know exactly when they arrive, so then I can compute. I know what tickets to get them, and how much per diem money to give them, so they can get a hotel room to stay overnight. Now, the book that I used then, as I said, must have been this thick. I bet it's paper thin today. The point is, the government's destroyed the railroads with overtaxation, over-regulations, and the unions, of course. The government allowed the unions to negotiate extortionary contracts. So as a result, a lot of our produce and products have to travel by highway, by truck, using rubber, gasoline. The most efficient method of transportation is the steel wheel against the steel rail.
Yeah.
And you could see a freight train with 3 or 4 people on it, 50 trail car. Think of how many trucks on the road. So to the degree that there's pollution from all of these sources, it was the government that caused it. Europe still has railroads. Japan has. What happened to our railroads? The government destroyed our railroads, and there's another reason why they destroyed the railroads. The federal government wanted to build highways, because about 10% of the money spent on highways was siphoned off in kickbacks and under-the-counter payments. You know,
really?
Yeah, of course. Now, the federal highway, now how does the government justify building highways? They said they were interstate, see? Well, you know that Hawaii has interstate highways?
You're right. I never thought about it, but you're right. They do have one.
How could they have an interstate highway? Because the government wanted to build the highways. They don't care if they were interstate or not. But it was the government that destroyed our railroad system. There's another thing we had years ago. We had an excellent, well paid for, and it used very little energy. We had urban transportation system. It was called trolley cars. We had a lot of trolley cars in New Haven. They ran all night. And these were these old high-end trolley. They never wear out. And you could actually at one time take a trolley car from Boston almost to Baltimore. They were connected.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, in New Haven, Connecticut, they have a trolley car museum. So, but they got rid of the trolley cars. And now, I know that in New Haven, if you get to the railroad station, even the buses stop running at 10 o'clock. The trolleys used to run all night.
Interesting.
But
you're right. We don't. They used to have trolleys in Los Angeles. Used to be called red cars.
Well, and the trolleys, I mean, they were good for 50 years. They didn't wear, I mean, and the tracks were there. No gas, no rubber. It was the government who destroyed the railroads and our urban transportation system made up of trolley cars. The government, but you see, you have to understand, when the Second World War was over, American factories rebuilt. Europe was largely in ashes, as was Japan. We had the only country which had factories left, and it was American factories that rebuilt Europe, and we rebuilt Japan. Right after the war, 1950-60, practically every country in the world was getting foreign aid. Every country. No country in the world ever gave away all of its wealth the way the United States did. Not only did we give it away, we dissipated it. Our politicians, creating jobs for themselves, bureaucratic jobs, gave away our wealth to the point that today the United States is the world's biggest debtor nation. The power that's going to be is going to be China. China is building up their industrial base. China today is using 25% of the world's steel. The reason why a lot of commodity prices are going up, a friend of mine told me that they want to make batteries. Lead prices are going up. Why? Because China is buying up so much lead. China is buying up all the scrap. I was in Kmart, about a month ago. Anybody can check this out. They went in there, they had 75 bicycles made in China, just in one store. Now just imagine all the bicycles the Chinese have. Anybody see an American-made bike these days?
Museum.
In a museum, right.
I saw a Schwinn in a museum.
But we've had it. This country, in about 2 or 3 years...
The Democrats and the Republicans have destroyed this country, both of them.
Right. And why? Because promising the people something for nothing. Look at Kerry saying he's going to create 10 million jobs. How's he going to create? He's worked in government all his life. He doesn't know anything about creating jobs. Jobs come about because some individual believes that there is a climate for making a profit. And he has the capital to go in business. But in order to go in business, you need capital. And to get capital, you need savings. And we have a minus savings rate today. Americans are in hock up to their eyeballs. If the value of their houses go up, they refinance their houses, take the money out and buy something else. So they borrow out the equity. The point is, the people don't own their houses. They rent their car, or they lease their cars. There is no savings to speak of. We're not generating savings. And when the government keeps talking about, when they want to say how good the economy is, they talk about sales. Sales are up. Sales are up. And when sales are up, that means Americans are buying more products made in China. I mean, what is important is what we are producing. It's productivity that's important, not consumption.
We're not producing
anything.
Yeah,
now,
right.
when they talk about the United States economy, what are we producing? Now, you have these containers shipped.
We produce deficits.
That's exactly what it is. And we produce a lot of worthless paper currency.
And a lot of paper that people still think has value.
You know what's happening? Just think of it. When these container ships come in, they come in loaded with equipment, but they go out empty. So now the Chinese are paying the cost of transportation both to the United States and back. But a lot of these containers stay here, and they're being piled up in a lot of our seaports, and they have no room for these containers anymore because they just leave them here. Normally, the containers should be filled up and sent back. But we are paying for these imports by charging the imports. See, normally a healthy country pays for imports, consumer imports, with consumer exports. But we are not doing that. We are paying for consumer imports with Federal Reserve notes. Now, when China and Japan gets these notes, they pile up, and then they use them to buy our bonds or our land. Now, the government says, oh my God, the American economy is so great that Europeans and foreigners want to invest in America. No, what they're doing is buying up America. when they invest in America, they're buying it up. And many products that Americans would think are normally American businesses are now foreign owned. So therefore the profit from these businesses now flow overseas. And we're going to become
a third world nation?
Yeah, well, if you look at our trade, in comparison to China today, we're a third world nation. Now you can tell us an advanced nation. China is sending us manufactured products. What do we send back? We send back scrap, hay, and we ship to China, apart from maybe
wood pulp. We send them some wood pulp.
We send them wood. They're buying up our wood, they're buying up our scrap, and they're buying up our hay. And what do they send us? Manufactured products. I mean, you go in, you can't buy a radio that's not made in China. And you know, when you think about it, 25 years ago, they weren't making anything. All they were making is these little blue hats and little blue outfits.
Yeah.
And now Americans have gone over there and showed them how to make shoes and how to make clocks and how to make. When you go, all you got to do is go to Walmart. All their products. I'll tell you how.
And that's because the Chinese let other people make money in their country, which is interesting. The communist Chinese let outsiders make money in their country without charging them with these horrendous taxes and horrendous regulations.
But there's another thing. They don't have workmen's compensation laws. You don't have to worry about job discrimination, age discrimination. What has happened here is that the bureaucrats who are in control of the United States, these bureaucrats never worked in their lives. So they pass laws that sound
outside of government.
Yeah, outside. So they pass laws without even thinking the impact on the. Let me give you an example. Now, it sounds great to say, well, if a woman has a child, you know, she really ought to deserve her job back. And therefore they pass a law that if a woman has a baby, she has a right to get her old job back after 3 months. So that sounds great. It sounds like compassion. But let's look at the businessman. I had a son who had a business, and he hires his girl. He got a one-girl office primarily. She leaves. He has to hire somebody to take it, and it's a lot of work to train somebody in a small office. So now he trains her, and all of a sudden, she's out of work. She doesn't come in 1 day, 2 days. I mean, she's absent a lot. I mean, for a couple of weeks. Mm-hmm. And then he discovers she's pregnant. Because he calls me and says, oh boy, am I in trouble. Because if she's pregnant, and once she has a baby, he has to hire her back. But then how do you hire a replacement to say to the replacement, no, this job is only going to be for 3 months or 4 months until she comes back? Well, who wants that job? So now my son was going to have trouble thinking in terms how he was going to replace her when she had a baby. And now he can't fire her because...
Right. That wouldn't be a problem in China.
So here's what happened. But fortunately she quit, apparently. Mm-hmm. But the person who passes the law that a person who has a child has a right to get your job back, he doesn't realize the problems that creates for the entrepreneur. Now, if you want to have a child, that's your problem. It's not, you've elected to have a baby. Right. That's your problem. Now, it sounds very good to say, we're going to give you your job back. But what does that do for the person who runs a business? How can he hire a replacement? And then he has to explain his job to somebody. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. And why does Congress pass such a law? Because the public thinks it's a good law. Because the average person is not an employer. Right. He doesn't understand the problems of the employer.
Exactly. Okay, we exhausted that. I want to go back to your battle with the IRS. So the 9th District Court of Appeals has not made a decision yet,
no.
But they've taken the restraining order, they stayed the restraining order, so you can sell your books, they can still...
I can sell these products. I couldn't sell these products before.
Yeah, you got a whole shelves full of products you couldn't sell. Now you can sell them if people are smart. They buy your book. Get them now because if they do ban your book again,
I can't sell them.
You won't be able to sell them, and they'll go to $300 a copy on eBay for the federal mafia. Which I saw that and I said, wow, what a deal!
It's worth it. I'll tell you what. I've had people who buy my books who save thousands and thousands of dollars per year. But not only the saving of money, you don't have to keep books and records. Well, there's one book I'll always be able to sell. You see, I sell the Internal Revenue Code. And they can't stop me from selling it. Maybe they're going to stop me
It's
from
your own
selling
book. Where do you get the Federal Revenue Code?
Well, I buy it
From
from
the
Research Institute of America.
Not from the IRS. You
No,
buy it from-
now you can't buy it. I buy it from a private publisher.
Huh.
And I code it and I highlight it. But the bottom line is, a former Chief Justice, John, I can't figure out his name, but our most important Chief Justice, here it is, or what's his name, said, highlight that, I can't even think of his name.
You're not saying John Marshall.
John Marshall, in Marbury versus Madison. The power to tax involves the power to destroy.
To destroy. Absolutely.
And that's what the government has done.
Right.
And you have to, you know, I want your listeners to consider something here. I mean, this is so clear. America reached the zenith of its power and influence at the end of the Second World War. When the Second World War was over, and we destroyed largely Germany and Japan, the United States ended the war with the only real productive plan. In 1945, 1950, America's influence was just, it's unbelievable. America got anything it wanted. Every country was beholden to the United States. If you look in the newspapers of the era, or magazines, they always talk about it was a dollar shortage, a dollar shortage. No, it was a shortage of American products. That was the age of what was known as the ugly. You ever hear about that? The ugly American. Remember the ugly American?
Yeah, there was a book written.
What was the ugly American? The ugly American was Americans traveling around the world with cameras slung around their neck, with money to spoil, and everybody was jealous of the Americans because we had the money and we had
it all.
We had it all, right? Now, I want your listeners to think about this. Think of, that was 50 years ago. Now, so 1950, America was a powerhouse. It was American factories that was rebuilding Europe and Japan. Now, that was 50 years ago. Now, think of all the laws that have been passed in the last 50 years.
You couldn't hold them all in this room.
And now say to yourself, how did America make it to 1950 without all those laws? Do we need those laws? If we needed them, how do we get to 1950? And I want to show you another thing. I want your listeners to close their eyes for a minute and just picture America in the year 1900. No automobiles, no airplanes, no movie houses, horse and buggies, maybe dusty roads. Okay, now let's move ahead 50 years, from 1900 to 1950. Now what a picture you got. Well, you get automobiles, you have airplanes, you have all. It's like moving from one planet to another. I mean, the picture is like day and night. That's because we had very little government during that whole period of time. The New Deal, which brought about big government, started just before the Second World War, and big government didn't have a chance to catch us. So all that progress was made with very little government. I mean, just think of the difference between 1900 and 1950. Now let's go to 1950. I get a picture of America in 1950. You can see that on a lot of movies. 1950, Gregory. And now let's move 50 years ahead. Now, what kind of changes? You have air conditioning. But now there have been some changes. Women are now working that never worked before.
Computers.
Because but how does this change? How does this benefit the average person? He still works longer hours now than he worked then.
You know, you're right. I remember going to a World Fair where they showed the kitchen of the year 1990. This was back in the 60s. There was a World Fair somewhere, I think it was 64. The kitchen of the 1990s, and it was going to be so futuristic, and hours were supposed to get shorter. We were supposed to be worrying about what to do with our leisure time, because people are going to make more money and work less hours. But as I see people now,
we're working longer hours.
Longer hours for less pay.
For less pay. Well, you know that in the United States, industrial workers work longer hours than the industrial workers of any other industrial country. In Europe, it's very common. Throughout Germany, Italy, they get from 4 to 6 weeks vacation. Americans, if they're lucky, get 2 weeks.
If you work long enough.
Yeah. But the point is, before the Second World War, we used to talk about a 40-hour work week. And women didn't work. My father was a carpenter, had 7 or 8 in our family. All my friends, their parents didn't work. I mean, their mothers didn't work. And in high school, I sold magazine subscriptions and brushes, door to door in the summertime and sometimes after school.
Were you a Fuller brush man?
No, I didn't work for Fuller Brush, but I'll tell you what I did. I sold brushes in this respect. A lot of merchandise was sold door to door. For instance, here's what I did. There was a guy who sold bedspreads and drapes and silverware. And so what did he do? He used me to open up the account. In other words, he would give me some brushes. And he would give, and it could have been 50 cents. Maybe he gave me $2 worth of brushes. My job was to go and sell these brushes so he can collect 50 cents a week. See, we didn't want to get paid, because they got these brushes and they paid 50 cents a week. Now he would come to collect the 50 cents a week. Now as he came to collect, he got to know the family. Now maybe the daughter is getting married. He would sell her a whole, and this is the way he sold. Now it became two. Now maybe they needed some new dishes. He would get, okay, another $2 a week. And then little by little he could sell them beds and he could outfit their whole house. But he used me to open the account by selling the brush. So I never actually worked for Philip Brushes, but I used to see vacuum cleaner salesmen. Encyclopedia Britannica, a guy was in here today, worked for Britannia for about 24 years. Last year, Britannia, one day fired all their salesmen. They went to the computer. None of this.
They fired all their salesmen
in one day. They didn't even know it. They walked in one day and they closed, no severance pay, nothing. Now the guy sells Encyclopedia Americana. But there are no door-to-doors. Even Welcome Wagon doesn't even function. Why? Because there's nobody home. All the women are working. Now, years ago, as I said, I sold magazines door-to-door. I sold brushes door-to-door. But there are all kinds of doors. Most of your insurance in the United States, the biggest companies were what is known as debit companies. Metropolitan, Prudential, John Hancock, and they used to have salesmen. They used to collect a nickel or a dime. They used to sell 20-year endowment policies for $200. And what they would do, they would collect. So you had all these salesmen because people were home. But now there are no, because everybody is working.
Right.
We have law. So with all these computers and all with these labor saving, and I'll tell you something else.
They're working harder.
They're working, and now years ago,
more heart attacks, more breast cancer.
Years ago, you drove into a gas station. Somebody, they put gasoline in your car. They check the water in your battery. They put air in your tires. Sometimes, if you watch, they do replays of the old Milton Berle show, and he was sponsored by Texaco.
You're so right. In my hometown, where I live in, there is not one service gas station left in the entire town. Now it's Chevron, Exxon, Shell. You pump every place you go. You pump it yourself.
And you consider.
And you're paying off $2.50.
Well, you consider the older women who have to pump their own gas. So what you're talking about is a different standard, a different way of life. People used to get waited on. Now, this is with all of the labor-saving devices. We should be working fewer hours. But now a person works 2 jobs and his wife works. In other words, the government never talks about how many hours we work. They talk about family earnings. They talk about, because it takes more hours to support a family now than 50 years ago.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Now, years ago, 50 years ago, when I was in
this is a big issue with you, the loss of American productivity.
Well, productivity and it's leisure. It's the loss of a lifestyle. When I was in high school, I couldn't go over a girl's house where her mother wouldn't be there. Now, in Oprah last week, she had a woman on her show telling Oprah that the women, the families don't know what's going on. They're having orgies in the afternoon. Nobody's home. And the kids know what they're doing. She described what's going on in the language and how they lie to their parents. It's not that they're having sex with a boyfriend. They're having orgies. They're having orgy parties. These are kids who are 11, 12, 13. True, they can see a lot of this stuff on television, which gives them ideas. But the parents are not home.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. We've lost the...
And then you have latchkey kids. I mean...
Do you think Bush can turn this around? Is Bush going to bring back...
No, he's not going to turn it around. Because
Kerry can't bring it back.
Kerry, just to show you, it's just Kerry. This talking about 10
Well,
million...
who should we vote for? If Bush can't turn it around and Kerry can't do it...
Well, neither of them are going to turn around because, well, I would vote, for various reasons for Bush. But Bush is not going to turn it around. He has... Because when Bush cut taxes, he's supposed to cut government spending. What government programs did he eliminate? I'll tell you the programs they have to eliminate. No one's going to turn this around unless they do the following. We've got to throw out all U.S. labor laws. We've got to get rid of the minimum wage law. We've got to get rid of all laws that interfere with productivity. They're not going to get rid of them. You got to get the government out of welfare. And one of the things you got to stop are all these stupid student loan programs, because the government is paying these kids to go to college where they're wasting their time. They're swilling beer, chasing women, and they're going running out for spring break. When I went to college, I never heard of spring break. When spring came, we either gave me an opportunity to work, earn some more money, or catch up on my school. You have kids who all they're doing is delaying the period of time when they go to work. They shouldn't be in college. They should be out learning a skill or a trade. This nation can no longer afford, and one of the biggest wastes in this country is the money we're spending on public education. Because we're keeping these kids in high school until they're 18. Now, they graduate high school. Most of them, we got 1/3 or 25% of functional illiterates. They're not going to make a living academically. They don't have a skill or a trade. They'd be better off getting kicked out of school at 14 and learning a trade. So we have a country of 300 million people who can't make it. Most of the people can't make anything. And right now, we are living on the credit that we're getting from foreign countries. But as I said, one of the biggest rip-offs, and everybody's afraid to talk about the wasted money in education because it sounds like you're anti-intellectual. But we are spending more. The cost of educating children in our public school is roughly twice as high as what it costs in the private sector. Twice as high. And of course, kids in private school even learn better. But with the public school system, there are many Americans who say, look, we're going to homeschool our kids. And because even though the government's going to do it for nothing, they know the kids are going to learn nothing. So they homeschool their kids. And, as I said, our whole education system is geared to make money for teachers.
It's obvious. That's a fact. What happened now a few weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, the oral arguments went up on banning the book.
Yes.
And the appellate court.
We
get back to that. And then the IRS came back and indicted you?
Yes, I just got indicted.
How recently?
Last week.
So within 5 weeks of the thing sitting with the appeals court, they come out and indict you on what?
Well, they charged with tax evasion.
Tax evasion.
Giving false information.
False information.
Also, a conspiracy to defraud the government.
Conspiracy to defraud the government?
Yeah, what the government is doing is defrauding all Americans because there is no law that says you got to pay income taxes.
So now,
but I invite all your friends or your listeners to go to my website, because within the next 2 or 3 days, I am going to post to my website.
The website is www.paynoincometaxes.com.
I will post 4 motions to my website to dismiss all these charges. And these motions will convince and explain the American public why this court has no jurisdiction to even conduct a criminal trial. What my motions will show is that everyone who has ever been prosecuted for a tax crime in the last 50 years has been prosecuted illegally. And I believe that after I post these motions and memorandum of law to my website, I believe the government will not ever again be able to prosecute anybody for any tax crime. I'm all out of internal revenue codes.
Oh,
But let me just show you a book here that I'm the only one who sells this book. It's out of print. It's called The Power to Destroy by Senator William W. Roth.
The Power to Destroy by Senator William V. Roth Jr. and William H. Nixon.
Now let me just show you what this is. Senator Roth was the senator who was in charge of the Senate Finance Committee that investigated the IRS in 1997. Now I want you to look at the back of the book and verify that there's a series of bullets on the back of the book. And all of these bullets start off how the IRS, with near absolute authority granted by Congress, placed judge, jury, and executioners. He was depriving countless taxpayers of basic rights. So here Senator Ross says the IRS deprives taxpayers of basic rights. How the IRS assesses outrageous and arbitrary penalties that convert minor debts and innocent accounting mistakes into insurmountable financial. Notice how the IRS does this, how the IRS does it. So what he's basically suggesting, and incidentally here he writes, you'll see it. It says studies have shown that 34% of seizure cases reviewed by the IRS did not meet agency's procedural requirements and resulted in the mistreatment and abuse of taxpayers. What he's saying that at least 1/3 of IRS seizures were done in violation of law. Now, but he does one thing. He blames everything, you'll notice, on the IRS.
Right.
Well, you see, the government has done a terrific public relations job. They have gotten the public to hate and fear the IRS, while presumably still...
So you still go vote for your Democrat and your Republican congressperson.
But you see, it's not the IRS that's doing it. It's the government that's doing it, using the IRS as their agency. It's like if I were to go around the room punching people in the nose, and the people would be saying, oh, Schiff is a nice guy, but his fist, his fist is terrible. You see, this is nonsense. The IRS does nothing that the government doesn't let them get away with. The government knows it's doing this. The government knows the IRS is doing this, because since there is no law requiring people to pay income taxes, the only way the IRS can collect money is by extortion, by illegally seizing property, and that is why organized crime in America begins with the federal government.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Irwin. Let me ask you a couple quick questions. You said Gary Nolan, Libertarian candidate seeking the nomination of the Libertarian Party against Kerry and Bush, called you. Are you going to vote for him or endorse him?
Well, am I going to who?
Gary Nolan. Are you going to endorse him?
I know Gary. I mean, Gary has interviewed me. Gary has interviewed me a number of times on the radio. I mean, I was a candidate myself, a Libertarian candidate, years ago. I disagree with a lot of things. I mean, in philosophy, I agree with the Libertarian Party, but my problem with the Libertarian Party is they do a lot of talking. All they do is talk, but they do nothing. I told the Libertarian Party to change the plank in their platform, which says they want to abolish the 16th Amendment, but the income tax is not imposed pursuant to the amendment. Why doesn't the Libertarian Party honestly tell the American public that there's no law requiring you to pay income taxes? Why don't they do something constructive? All they do is talk, but as far as I'm concerned, they accomplish nothing. They got more votes, Libertarian, 20 years ago than they get today.
So your idea, we were just having supper, and your idea that if the Libertarian were to simply say, if elected president, I will
abolish
all tax liens and levies. They're all illegal. I will abolish them.
Right.
There's 2 or 3 million people facing those.
Right.
You think those 2 or 3 million people will then vote for the Libertarian?
Not the whole 2 or 3 million, but certainly a percentage. But what that would also do is alert the public that
these are illegal.
Yes, they don't do that. They don't do that. If the Libertarian Party makes a big mistake, and I think it's a joke, they really think they run a presidential candidate really believing that they're going to elect him. They're not going to elect him. They don't have a prayer of electing him. But what they can do is use the opportunity of a national election to try to promote a more libertarian environment. They can expose. There are two things, the government's two major powers. This is where the government gets most of its powers from. The government gets most of its powers from its monetary creation and taxes. Now, there are 3 clauses in the Constitution giving the government the power to tax. 2 clauses establish direct taxes, which must be apportioned, and the 3rd clause allows the government to impose excise taxes. Now, the income tax is not imposed pursuant to any of those clauses, because the income tax is not imposed as an apportioned direct tax, nor is it imposed as an excise. That's why it's voluntary. See, the tax is legally, because, okay, but the government collects the tax illegally. The government collects the tax in violation of the laws. Congress was careful not to make the laws illegal.
Okay.
That's why they're voluntary. But the courts, the biggest branch of corruption is in our court system. The practice of law in America is a racket. American law is designed to make money for lawyers. But the point is, the government violates all of the apportionment provisions of the Constitution. Now, the Constitution only contains 2 provisions giving the government monetary power. Here, Article 1, Section 10 says, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debt. So only gold and silver coin is supposed to circulate. Well,
Right.
where's the gold and silver coin?
It's gone.
Now, but that means they're violent. Now, here is the other provision in the Constitution. It says, the government shall coin money and regulate the value thereof. Coin, it didn't say print, it says coin it. So
Right.
now the government is violating the 2 monetary provisions and the 3 taxing provisions. There are 5 provisions of the Constitution which govern the government's taxing and monetary powers, which they ignore. But what is the Libertarian Party doing about it? Nothing. By calling attention that the Libertarian Party should call for the abolishment of the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve is just printing worthless notes which get spent in circulation in violation of the monetary powers of the government in the Constitution. So why don't they call attention to that?
I think they will.
Yeah, well, they
I
didn't
think
do
this
it.
time around they will. If Aaron Russo wins the nomination, are you going to vote for him for president?
We'll see. I am saying that, as far as I can tell, the Libertarian Party itself has done nothing to promote a more libertarian environment in this country. All libertarians I've seen do, they talk a lot. They talk a lot but do nothing.
Well, they had some in Alaska to abolish the Alaska state income tax.
Did they do it?
Yes, 22 years ago. Dick Randolph, Ken Farron got elected as libertarians, and they kept their word to abolish the state income tax in Alaska.
Well,
And they
okay.
still don't have an income tax in Alaska because of those 2 libertarians.
Well, good. I'm not saying, see, the libertarians can do certain things on the local level. But all I'm
But that was
saying,
statewide.
all I'm
That was
saying,
statewide.
when I ran for the nomination, and my only objective then was to get them to change their planks. They had a plank, which they still have, calling for the abolishment of the 16th Amendment. And I said to them, I took the Internal Revenue Code, which we normally have some here. But
You sold them all because you're doing good
we
now.
sold them all. We get a new.
You're in business again.
And I said to Harry Brown, who was the candidate then, I gave him his own code, and I said, show me the law you want to abolish. There is no law here. And I went in front of the Libertarian Platform Committee, where they had in their plank, abolish the 16th Amendment. I said, why? There is no law that says you got to pay income taxes. Why don't you call attention to the fact that there is no law requiring to pay income taxes?
It's voluntary.
It's voluntary.
Every commissioner says it's voluntary.
Yes.
So, but if you don't pay, they get real upset.
But let the people, yes, but if see, at the time I did it, I said the Libertarian, see, the government at that time liked to call me a tax protester, and liked to call us tax protesters. But if the nation's 3rd largest party came out and said the payment of income tax is voluntary, you don't have to pay if you don't want to, then how could they call us tax protesters? But they didn't do it. They didn't have the courage to do it. So as far as I'm concerned, all they were doing is talking. They have not helped promote. And incidentally, all the libertarian think tanks, the Heritage Foundation, what's that other?
Cato.
Cato. People send Cato my book. Cato says they're not persuaded. My book persuades everybody. Why doesn't the Heritage Foundation mentions the fact that my book shows you don't pay income taxes? Why doesn't Cato Institute? You know why? Because they all talk about less government, but they don't do anything to promote it.
Well, thank you for your views. We've been here with Irwin Schiff in Las Vegas, Nevada. This is William Wagner. Irwin, thanks so much for giving me your time.
Well, my pleasure.
And
I just invite you people to go to my website and look at those new motions I'm going to post there.
check out his website at www.paynoincometaxes.com.